Oh, okay. So when did Residuum first come to you? Was it a world, a scene, a character?
Um, it was actually I sort of had a bit of an idea to sort of write something in a kind of zombie apocalyptic kind of way, but I didn't want to do anything that's been done before. So the zombies turned into robots, and then the story evolved into something quite different.
So the title Residuum is so evocative. What does it mean to you in the context of the story?
So the world is set in a place in the far future in space where humanity is no longer the kind of dominant species in the galaxy. So the title Residuum is very much about the sort of leftovers ganging up together and trying to make a difference in a world where they're dwindling.
What were your guiding principles when building the tech, politics, and the cultures in your galaxy?
The guiding principles were to, without going too sort of deep on current trends in the real world, to just kind of give a little bit of a flavor, like the refugee system in the book is hopefully shining a little bit of a light on how difficult it is in the real world, but also in a fantasy context. So the whole book was kind of loosely based on reality, but put in a faraway galaxy that you could sort of escape to.
hmm So let's talk about the machine justice system. Where did the idea originate, and does it comment on anything in our world? I know you've mentioned it a little bit. If you wanted to expand on that a little further.
Yeah, so the whole idea came from the sort of surge of AI that we're experiencing at the minute, and how AI is kind of mimicking human artists and human thinking. And the idea came from, what if in the future, if AI does get more dominant, what if they decide to reinvent karma? So it's about kind of a machine thinking that karma and how we see karma, recreating that, and then the machines go about doing karma in a very brutal kind of genocide kind of fashion. That's the nub of it.
hmm So arachnid machinations, data pirates, and ancient alien tech. How did you keep your world grounded while exploring such bold sci-fi elements?
So the huge spiders in there, I mean, they're huge and they're sort of cybernetically enhanced and they're telepathic and they're sort of vast, but they're still spiders. So I kind of, anyone reading my book hopefully will still relate to the fact that it's a spider and be able to feel the creepiness or whatever you experience when you think about spiders. And again, that's the whole thing of the book. Everything is kind of absurd and really sort of out there, but it's based on something that we all probably know quite well.
So Charles is a refugee caught between her past and her potential. How did you shape her emotional arc?
So she is on the run with her mother in the beginning of the story, and very much a teenager, very much sick of her mother, kind of trying to rebel against her mother, but also in a life-threatening situation. So we don't see much of her emotional state at the beginning. We just see a child being frustrated. But as things progress, without trying to spoil anything, she comes into her own a little bit more and makes relationships with people that you wouldn't really generally put together with that character. And that's where she starts to shine, by bouncing off other people and kind of becoming part of the next level of the story.
There's a strong undercurrent of generational trauma and identity. Was that intentional from the start, or did it evolve while you were writing?
A lot of it did evolve while I was writing it. I started from a very small seed, and it kind of extrapolated out into a bigger galaxy. But I always wanted to get a character who we know, who you might have daughters yourself, you might be a teenage girl yourself, and I wanted you to know that person, but then throw her into a entirely different world and see how she would react to giant spiders and assassin droids and various things that seem outlandish. And that's what I really enjoyed about having a really down-to-earth character and throwing them in there.
Is there a character when you were writing the story that surprised you? Is there somebody that, because sometimes when I write, I start off with like a character and then the story kind of like falls around them. But when you were writing, is there something that surprised you, or a character that surprised you, or something that evolved that you weren't expecting, and what was it?
Yeah, so there's a character in Residuum called Shadwell, who is a kind of 7-foot insect character with an exoskeleton, and I had a certain idea for that character, and it was going to be a warrior, a tank, like not much going on under the surface, just really brutal and strong. And while I was writing the story, she changed from a he to a she, for starters, and then she became a little bit more of an alternative mother figure for Charlotte. So she definitely evolved, and even though she's huge and she obliterates her enemies, the character is more about the inside and the softness and how she takes Charlotte under her wing.
So Charlotte's relationship with her mother adds a complex layer. What were you trying to show through that dynamic?
So again, trying to tiptoe around spoilers, because there is this kind of AI generated karma in the world. Charlotte's mother, through intricacies in the plot, understands this, and she lives her life in a very penitent way, and she's got a lot of etiquette and a lot of she tries to impress on Charlotte that you must live in a very right way, and you must say thank you, and you must have manners, and she's got this kind of obsessive nature to do everything right, which really frustrates Charlotte. But actually we find out later in the story that is because she's trying to avoid this justice that's been created by the machines. But Charlotte doesn't know any of that. She just thinks her mum's a kind of a bit obsessive and gets really frustrated.
So how do you stay connected with writing your story? Are there times that you have faced like writer's block, or anything that in the writing process that made it really difficult and that you overcame, and what was that?
So strangely, I'm quite a slow writer. I take a lot of time, and my last book took me several years to finish. But for some reason, Residuum really needed to come out, and I think I wrote the first draft in about 3 months. It was relentless. I was writing every time I had spare 15 minutes. I was going at it, and that was unusual for me. I don't particularly suffer from writer's block. I try to not believe in it, because I think if you kind of believe in it as a concept, then it will stop you writing. So I don't fear a blank page. I might write something awful and then remove it and delete it and start again, but I try not to worry about the blank page syndrome. I just start writing, and even if that paragraph goes in the bin, it's got me flowing.
Mm-hmm. So, how long did it take? Okay, it took like 3 months. Are there any like tools that you use that you found really helpful to like keep track of, character names or places? How did you like plan out that whole story arc? And
Well, actually, I mean, I did very little planning and recording. Again, the last book I released, I had miles of notes, plans, character descriptions, all kinds of stuff. This book was very much like I just spent 3 months kind of just flowing out this story that I had in my head, and I didn't make any notes. It was all in my head, well, pretty much. The only thing that I did differently this time is I used different software to actually format the book. But other than that, it was all from head to computer, and it was just quite seamless.
that's amazing. I wish I had that when I was writing.
I do get tied up in the notes, like like I said, the previous book, there were so many notes that I felt a little bit hindered by the fact that I had so many notes. And I had to, every time I sat down to write, I had to get it all out and kind of get my brain in the right place. So I think I intentionally thought I'm going to write a very natural flowing story that's just going to go from there to there. And that's what I did.
What kind of research did you carry out? Was there any scientific, mythological, anything that went into building this universe?
I guess my day job, I work in the charity sector, so I come across lots of so shall we say vulnerabilities that human beings kind of experience, and I don't work in sort of the refugee sector, but I do speak to a lot of people who work in that field. So I guess I didn't intentionally go for research, but there is a lot of things that I'm privy to that have sort of found their way into the story through my work life.
Speaking of charity and refugees, Charles is a teenage refugee. What does being displaced do to her sense of identity at the start of the story compared to the end?
So she goes through very much a process of being moved around from one place to another, being housed in a certain place, being processed and sitting around in kind of processing rooms and not really feeling any value in the galaxy. She's almost like a nuisance to the machines that are processing her. So she very much doesn't put any roots down in any place to live. She feels no value as a human being in the galaxy, and she's just kind of stuck with her. She's still got a lot of grief because before the story starts, she loses her father and she's frustrated by her mother. So she's just got nowhere to go and no real drive to do anything but follow her mother around and be placed wherever the machines are placing her. During the story, she starts to, it's very much about found family. She starts to meet characters that seem a little bit unobtainable at first, but she joins forces and finds her place in the galaxy.
She's forced to grow up fast in a violent and uncertain galaxy. How did you balance her youth with her resilience?
I mean, I guess I've got two daughters myself. One of them is a teenager, and as a parent, I quite often find myself trying to step back and trust that my daughter will find a way through, you know, life and its problems. And as a parent, you kind of want to make sure that you help them get through all these challenges, but sometimes that's not going to help. Sometimes you need to just trust and have faith in them that they can do it. And I guess I did that with Charlotte. She had some horrendous things happen to her, and she's a young girl, but she's a young girl that's already had things happen to her. So she's got a toughness, and I tried to let her character just breathe and grow and become what it was going to come by interacting with these new characters. And I feel like I didn't hold her hand too much. She grew on her own.
Were there like specific moments in the book that marked a turning point for her emotionally or morally?
There are certain parts in the book. So Charlotte doesn't have any agency at the beginning of the story. She's dragged around place to place. Terrible things happen, and then she finds herself with this new family, and she still has no agency. She's just kind of a stowaway on this ship. And there are certain moments where suddenly she steps forward, and through either through a relationship or a decision, she grabs a bit of agency, and things start to happen around her instead of to her. So she does grow, and then she becomes, eventually by the end, she's a valid member of the crew. She's listened to, she's respected, and she's an integral part of the plot of that episode of the story.
What were the hardest parts of her story to write truthfully?
Sorry, what were the worst parts?
No, the hardest parts.
The hardest parts.
Yeah. What were the hardest?
I guess it was the very subtle, gradual emergence of Charlotte's character from being just a teenager, kind of not interested and sort of almost rebellious, to eventually becoming part of the crew and having relationships and having some say in what the rest of the story does. I didn't want to do that too fast because that would be unnatural. I didn't want to do it too slow that people weren't engaged in following her tale.
When did you realize Residuum was going to be a full book and not just a short story or concept?
I think I set off to. It was always going to be quite short, like shorter than a full novel. I think because my last novel wasn't super long, but it's a very formulaic novel that took a long time to write, and I just felt like I needed to release something that was a full book, but not going to take me 10 years to write. So I kind of settled on the novella because a short story, I find you can explore only so many concepts in a short story and still keep there being a point to it being a short story. So I needed to write a full book, but not take a long time doing it. So I thought I'll just do an episodic short book that I can then follow up with a similar sized, and I can create that world by releasing several episodes of the same world.
So did you know how Residuum would end when you started, or did the story kind of just evolve as you wrote it?
I did know the end. Yeah, I knew the beginning and I knew the end. And then the bits in between evolved. But I always had an absolute definite sort of clash in mind that was going to be the main ending.
How do you approach revisions? Do you do them like in a massive rewrite, or do you polish gradually as you write?
I use an amazing beta reader and an amazing editor, and I have complete faith in them that they get what I'm trying to do. So I will go through 2 or 3 times on my own, and then I will send them to my my amazing people. And then when they come back, I'm very rarely surprised by what they say. I always completely trust and realize that it's my mistake. I've missed that plot point, or I've not explained that well enough. So the trust I've got is really important. So as soon as they say, you know, you need to write more of this section, or you need to make the ending longer or whatever, I have absolute faith. So I do as I'm told, and hopefully the book is better for it.
So how do you balance showing versus telling in a complex sci-fi world where so much context is needed to be delivered to the reader?
I do try and show. I obviously there's an amount of telling because you've got to sort of in the sci-fi genre, you've got to not necessarily explain the tech on a scientific level, but you've got to explain what the tech does and how it works. So I like to show, but I also don't want to delve into too much hard science fiction where we're talking quantum physics and things like that. I like to keep it. I like my books to be escapism and not sort of a science manual that you could pick apart. And it's the same in my fantasy stuff. I don't want to write a historical fantasy where somebody's going to say, you know, that armor wasn't invented at that time in history and sort of pick it apart. I'm more about just going, let's set a world that's believable and let's just go on an adventure and enjoy it rather than the scientific, you know, hard stuff.
So, like, obviously, you've written fantasy before. What drew you to science fiction as your genre of choice for this story?
I think I've always thought of fantasy is, I mean, obviously there's the classic medieval sort of fantasy, and I read a lot of that stuff, and that's in my sort of foundations. But I've always thought fantasy could be anywhere. It could be Western, it could be space, it could be like anything. So I don't want to write anything that's too formulaic from somebody else's world. So I don't really see it as science fiction necessarily. I see it as a fantasy story, and it happens to be in space. But obviously, for marketing reasons and for, you know, getting your book out there, you need to fit into certain categories just to send it out there.
How do you ground a high concept sci-fi idea so that readers still care about the characters on a human level?
I think it's always about the characters. I think my intent is always to create a character that is believable, relatable, that has the mannerisms and the kind of visual sort of flaws that we all see every day in our normal lives, and then throw them into a complete escapist scenario. So I value characters over all the concept stuff, definitely. Even if I was going to write anything that was even harder sci-fi, it would all be, the characters would be first, and they'd live and breathe, and then the world and the tech and the magic or whatever it is would be just the backdrop, really.
That's actually like a good tip for writers. And because obviously, like, if the characters are not if they're not engaging, if they don't live and breathe, then like the story around them kind of like just falls apart. And yeah, I've never thought of it like that, actually.
Excellent. No, that's good. That's success.
So, did you build a timeline or galactic history for the world of Residuum, and how deep does the lore go?
I have kind of loosely got a plan for the world, because I actually started writing the next story before I started this one. So there's numerous, probably novellas in this world. Some of them are going to have the same characters. Some of them are going to be sort of different corners of this galaxy. So I already had a world built, and then I started Residuum. So there's more than I realized myself, to be honest. It's just that I started writing a story in one corner of the galaxy regarding a certain aspect of the world building, and then Residuum is a different one. But they will mesh together, hopefully.
So, were there any like sci-fi authors or stories that influenced the tone or style of Residuum, or that you look up to in a sense?
I'm a massive Star Wars fan, so
Oh, me too.
really,
Yeah.
yeah. So I could go on all day about Star Wars, and I, there's some bits of it that are better than others, but I think the reason I adore Star Wars is not necessarily the characters or the lightsabers. It's the fact that they built this amazing galaxy that can live on forever for different writers, for different people, animations, and anything can happen in Star Wars because the world is so robust and so enjoyable to be in. That's what I wanted to set off to do, not to make my version of Star Wars, but to make a world that will live and breathe, and maybe in the future somebody hopefully might say, I want to write a story in that universe.
Yeah. So like what we've already like covered this question a bit, but I wanted to expand on it. What was the hardest part of the world to write convincingly, and what was the part that surprisingly came easily to write?
So I guess it was difficult trying to, so towards the back half of the story, the main characters go to an AI kind of base, for want of a better word. And I realized as I was writing it that this is not a place built for human beings to exist in. So I suddenly found, oh, actually, like, should there be corridors and should there be stairs and things like that? So it was difficult to write an environment for people to engage with, but actually it's a machine environment and machines are going to be moving around it. And I found it a bit suddenly stopped me in my tracks a little bit, and I had to sort of really try hard to make it feel like a machine environment.
So like how did you like overcome that?
I guess it was more of an editing process. So I would write a section. I don't know, somebody was running down a corridor, and then I was like, let's get rid of the word corridor, and let's move them through the space and let the reader imagine how they're getting through. So not to explain too much, but just because even with my characters, I like my readers to invent how my characters look. I don't do a lot of description stuff because I want them to live in their heads, not in mine. So I kind of tried to do the same with the environment. So make it very robotic and metal and, you know, metal doors and shutters, but let the reader almost fill in the blanks for me.
Yeah. So, what made you choose the publishing route that you chose for this story and in general for your career as a writer?
So I started, like everybody, I started querying and I was approaching agents and publishers way back. And I got some positive responses, but I never quite got over the line. So I thought I need to, rather than be discouraged by that, I need to just start putting stories out. So I went down the self-publishing route. And then I did get a small press interested, and I was working with them for a while. But the trade-off of having to submit a certain amount of control. I mean, I'm not a huge control freak, but I enjoy the fact that I control everything. Sometimes it's an absolute nightmare because I have to control everything, but I like having control. So if I'm going to do some marketing in a certain direction, a certain place, I decide that. And so I stepped out of that press and carried on the self-publishing. And it's a huge workload, and it's draining, and it's demanding, and it's sometimes very difficult to keep motivated. But creatively, I absolutely control everything, and I control my own covers. I control my own what I write, and I like that place. So I'll probably stay on this path.
And I think it's like very like cathartic also, like to like write this story that just started off as an idea in your imagination, and then to see the whole project through to the end when you have this solid book and you're putting it out there for readers. I think like people listening might not understand that it might sound like, oh, okay, but you've given up a little bit of control, but it's actually like a lot. You have to basically, if they say like they need something taken out of your story, you have to compromise in that sense. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no like you can't be like, oh, I don't want to do that change. If they're like, no, it's not gonna sell, you're gonna have to remove it or change the story. So yeah.
And like I said before, the character Shadwell became female, and that was because I decided that this character is now becoming a different concept in my story. Whereas a publisher might have said, no, you've got to keep him as him and keep him doing what he does, and don't let him stray from the path that you've already told us you're going to put in your book. And I wouldn't like that at all.
Yeah. So, can you talk us through your publishing timeline from finished draft to published book, how that looks like, and any lessons that you learned along the way?
With Residuum, as I say, this has been a very swift process, because one of my aims was just to get something else released so that people don't forget I'm still here working away in the background. So it was all very quick. I wrote it in about 3 months. I then spent probably 6 months editing, rewriting, sharing it with beta readers and editors. And then when the final draft, or what I thought was the final draft at the time, was done, maybe 3 to 4 months before it comes out in 1 week, exactly a week today. And it's been about 4 months of kind of just polishing little bits, finding mistakes, changing the formatting, doing things like I created my own chapter headings and things like that. So there was a bit more design involved, just to make it a bit of a sweeter book, really. So all in all, I guess it's under a year from concept to shelf, which is astounding, because like I say, that my last book took me probably 8 or 9 years, but I had to learn a lot to even start that journey. And yes, I learned a hell of a lot from releasing my first book and trying to invade the indie scene and be part of it and learn from other authors and interview other authors. And I've just been, the last couple of years, I've just been soaking up knowledge from everybody else. And I have found myself in a place where I know a lot more than I did when I started.
That's actually like a great place to be. And that timeline is quite normal. I think a year it would take, wouldn't it?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's a short book, so I'm not taking absolute credit, but yeah, I'm quite pleased with that.
So, you've mentioned working with beta readers and editors. How do you find these people, and how do you make sure that they're the right fit for your story?
Yeah, good question. So when I first started writing seriously, people said to me, "You need to get an editor that you trust." And I thought, where the hell do you find an editor that you trust?
Yeah.
I have no idea whatsoever how to do that. So I spent a bit of time on things like Readsy and sort of checking out other editors and figuring out exactly what they do and what the difference is between different kinds of editors. And then what actually triggered it was I applied to have a short story in an anthology, and that
Mm.
anthology had an editor already assigned to it. So I worked for the first time with an editor on a short story, and we just clicked. It was just really good. And the way he approached my book was very much, this is your book. This is not my book. I'm not going to change your book into mine by suggesting things. I'm going to tell you what I think, and I'm going to try and make sure at all points that this is still your book and your story and your vision. And I just really, really appreciated that. So I basically said, will you come with me and edit my other stuff? And he said, yes, I'd love to. And then we've had an amazing relationship ever since. And I absolutely trust what he says. And he never puts his foot down. He will always say, I think you should explain this more, but if you don't want to, it's your book. And that's great.
So, what was your launch strategy? And like looking back, what would you tweak about it?
I think the only thing I've probably not failed, but the thing I could do better to launch Residuum would probably just be more interviews like this, do a little bit of a self-directed book tour, make sure I was on more podcasts and I was shouting about the book in a not just in a post saying, hello everyone, my book's going out, but actually being on panels and on discussions. But there's only so much time in a day, and I still work full time, and it's a real slog to take my work hat off and put my marketing hat on, as
Mm.
well as my writing stories hat. There's a lot of
Yeah.
hats, and it's astounding how much work goes into just making a product available and in the right places on the right online platforms and things like that. And it's just really difficult if you're self-published and you're having to do all that stuff on your own. You need all the friends you can get.
Yeah. So, how are you finding readers, social media, newsletters, paid ads? What's worked best so far, and what do you like wish you'd never even heard of? Something that you wish like you'd never even like considered, or yeah.
Yeah. So the worst thing is I'm constantly, I presume it's the same for any author, constantly bombarded with marketeers on different social media platforms saying, let's work together. I've read your book, it's great. Let's do this, let's do that. Here's my prices. And I have tried to be very staunch and selective about who I work with, but I have worked with a couple of these people who have got nowhere, and I've wasted money on I'm having faith in humanity where
Yeah.
I shouldn't have. But I've learned that lesson, and now I don't just go with anyone who pops up. But there's been a few sort of platforms where like discount platforms and things that have been really good for me. Hello Books is one of them. So I'll put my book down to £1 or $1 and promote it through their platform. That's been really good. I've got my own podcast panel, the Four Beardsmen of the Book Apocalypse. So we meet twice a month and talk to other authors. And I guess the best thing is just being part of the scene and talking to other people in the scene, and just having your books or your sort of reviews just out there a little bit more just builds up that general platform. And I've not got thousands of followers on all the social medias, but I try my best to be present, and that's all I can do really.
Yeah. I actually agree with you with the those people that be DMing you and saying like here are your prices. I think I've come across like a lot of authors who face that. And it's like you try to be optimistic like you said, but when you decide to, when you get the bill through and then like you decide, let me Google them, and then you see it's like some
Yeah,
random house in like London, you're like, oh my gosh, I've been scammed.
yeah. It's terrible, and some of them you can spot straight away. I somebody popped up the other day on Twitter and was saying, this book is incredible, I couldn't put it down, let's work together. And I was replying saying, this book isn't out yet, so you've not read this book, and that is a fact. So I was able to spot that is just, yeah, either a bot or somebody just hooking me for business. But I'm a person that trusts other humans too much, so I do get led into some corners sometimes that I probably should learn to avoid.
So, what's one myth about indie publishing that you wish more people would stop believing?
It's difficult because I've kind of learned that you're not going to just appear on the scene with an incredible book and you're going to rise to the top because your book is so brilliant. And I believe that that's a healthy way of thinking, because it takes time and it takes building your audience up and building your craft up. But the anomaly there is that there are certain people that pop up with an amazing book and rise to the top. So, and that's great for them. But I think if you believe that that will happen to you, it's probably not a healthy way of going at it. I think if you believe that, release your book, become part of a scene, try and sort of get your book in the right place, and try and just be part of this sort of whole content generation system that we all now live in. That's the way to get heard. And if you do manage to get the magic formula and somebody picks your book up and goes, you're incredible, you're straight to the top, then good for you. But don't think that's going to happen.
So, how do you stay connected with, obviously, like the broader writing community and other authors? I know you mentioned a bit about your podcast and social media. Is there anything else that you do to stay connected to the writing community and other authors as well?
Yeah, so I write reviews for fanfiaddict.com, and that is an incredible family, mostly authors. I'm so blessed to be part of that family, and it means that I get to keep my finger on the pulse. I get to find out what other like-minded people are reading and what they're liking. I get to put my own reviews out. I don't get a lot of time for that, but when I do like a book,